And this was the only report that I could get a little snippet of what happened 6 months before we actually went under COVID, and then the first 6 months of COVID. And what it did is it showed me some really interesting things. Then we come to the part that everybody wants to talk about. They want to know how well their brand's going to sell. So I always like to tell my customers that the numbers are indicators, they're not answers. Now, most of the time when you see a number, it's an answer, right? You work the equation in math and you get to the bottom and it says, X equals 12. Well, in this case, when I look at the Nielsen numbers, there's a mic there. When I look at the Nielsen numbers, I'm looking for what do they indicate to me. So at this particular slice that I took, this is a 52-week Nielsen report. I think it's dated October 6th. I pulled a 2-year versus 1 year versus current year. Why did I do that? Well, obviously because we're wearing these silly things. And this was the only report that I could get a little snippet of what happened 6 months before we actually went under COVID, and then the first 6 months of COVID. And what it did is it showed me some really interesting things. For example, if you take a look at that change versus 2 year ago column, we can see that Cabernet is up 17% over what it was doing 2 years ago and 1% over what it was doing a year ago. By the way, these numbers here are just private labeled wines. They made a report for me of just private label that they could track. This doesn't take into account any of your Costco's and Walmart, that kind of thing, but this is just what we could track so I could give you some numbers. Again, they're indicators, not answers. So when we look at this, where we were over the last 52 months is surpassing where we were in the pre-COVID market. Why not over the last year? Anybody have a reason why we wouldn't have been over last year? Got an idea? It's all because of the pantry loadout that all of us did, so we saw a huge volume increase, and now we're kind of normalizing again. So I wanted to make sure that I wasn't trying to compare myself to the peak. I wanted to make sure I compared myself to the average to see where the market would be. Again, I don't know if that's the right answer. It's just how I approached it. And I wanted to see, and I won't know if I'm right or wrong for another year, but I put my line in the sand, and that's kind of what I'm thinking is the way this market's going to go. So what I looked at, and what really stood out to me, and the reason I'm taking so much time on this slide, is the fact that as I'd be discussing this with one of my customers, and it's a real conversation that just happened, she came to me and said, Joe, I really want to do a red blend, but your numbers say that I shouldn't do a red blend. Again, she thought it was an answer, right? And I said, well, I won't tell you her name. It was down and it was down, but what do we know about this? All we know is that on the 100% of all the private label that was sold, across every category that private label was sold, red wine was down, red blends were down. It doesn't say it was in the premium category, it wasn't in the super premium. We didn't look that far yet because we just started with this report. So the PhD in this would have been diving down the next two layers and analyzing, which we do later on. So I looked at that and I said, okay, real quick, let's take a look at what branded items are doing in that same category and take a look that other red blends are up 14% over 2 years ago and only down 1% over last year, which means they're holding. This is on branded items. I said, so why are they both different? And it could very well be that there, aren't a lot of really good red wine positioned brands out there in the private label segment. It could be the fact that because the overwhelmingly amount of them might have been in the premium tier, that might be tanking and the super premium might be taking off. We have to look at all of that. We don't have time in this room to do it, but this is what we think about when we're doing private label, at least what I think about, because I want to be successful with you.